You can manufacture it in a couple of different ways. One is a wet cast method where you have a pretty typical kind of wet mix of concrete. You put hoses in the forms that kind of look like fire hoses. You place the concrete on top of it. As the concrete cures, you pull the hoses out of it and you end up with those cores. The other way is you can use an extruded method. And with that, the concrete is very dry, and it actually comes out of a machine. I always liken it to a tube of toothpaste, where you're kind of pushing the concrete out. Concrete might be about the same consistency as toothpaste as well, and you might have augers working in there, and that's going to create the openings in it. And with that dry mix, you can almost walk on it immediately. So that's a couple different areas that you can manufacture it in. Hollow core usually is going to be about 30 feet long, and we see a lot of it used for hotels, motels, single family, condominiums, schools, any place where you want to get a nice long span, and any place that fire safety is going to be an issue. It can be a really good product in any of those cases. Double T's, they're called double T's because that's what they look like, two T's right next to each other. Double T's have two parts of the product. The first part is your top surface that goes across the top of the T's, and that's going to be called your flange. Your flange is usually going to be about 12 feet wide. Sometimes we have 15 foot wide, but usually it's going to be 12 feet wide. And then you'll have the two stems coming down, the two stems of the T. And those are usually going to be about 18 inches deep. And then you're going to have a piece of precast that's generally 60 feet long and 12 feet wide. But you can go up to about 110 feet long with this. So we see this used a lot for parking decks. That's really the number one thing that you see it used in. You also see it used for the other building that I have down there is a convention center where you might have heavier loads on the floor, swimming pools, some condominium buildings will use them where you need longer spans. So this is generally longer spans and a little bit heavier duty floor product than you would get with the hollow core. Architectural precast, this is what you're going to see when you visit ALSIP. And architectural precast really starts to be where you have a lot more color, texture. Usually it's a cladding product on the exterior of a building. You can have color integrated right into it. You're going to start to have your curved pieces. You're going to start to have more decorative detail added to it. And these are usually cast in wooden forms rather than in steel forms. So you will have some repetition with them, but usually you're going to have form work that's built specifically for that particular building. Then you can also have wall panels. Wall panels can still have a little bit of decorative pieces to them, but in most cases, rather than having the color integrated right into it, you're going to stain over the concrete. So both of the yellow and the blue are both stained right into there. Sometimes we see people just leave the concrete right exposed, like you see here. But these are usually cast in what our industry calls long line beds. And so those beds can be 150 feet long, and they cast multiple pieces all at the same time. So usually not as much decorative detail added to those. Then you can also have structural products. Those would be columns, beams, inverted T-beams, any kind of structural wall panels, things like that. And that can be the entire structure and frame of a building. Typically, when you're using precast as the structural system, we see it usually used anywhere from 2 stories to about 11 or 12 stories would be typical. There is a project in California that goes 22 stories. That's about as high as it's gone. But, you know, we see a lot of 8 to 12 story structures done in structural precast. We also have modular construction. That's, in this case, it's a prison. That's probably the most popular use for it, where you've got the prison cells. And one of the reasons that this is so popular for the prisons is it can all be done off-site. So they had the furniture, the communications equipment, the safety equipment, all at the precaster site. They bring it out to the job site, they stack them, one right on top of the other. And in this case, they've got the 2 prison cells, and then they've got a lip coming out for a walkway. We don't see a whole lot of prisons being built in Illinois right now, considering we have one sitting empty. But for a while, that was being done. The interesting thing about these is the whole idea of modularity is really being carried into a lot of different products as well, the wall panels and floor systems. I'm starting to see more things being added at the precast plant. So the electrical conduit and boxes are being cast right in, holes for the plumbing being cast right in. So a lot of that is happening at the manufacturer site rather than happening at the job site. And that's something that a lot of insurance companies like because they feel it's a more controlled environment. And then we also do a lot of transportation products. In Illinois, the 3 biggest transportation products, well, 4 really, bulb tees, like you see going across, box beams. Those are usually for shorter bridges. They're empty or they're hollow boxes. Usually they have like a styrofoam piece in the middle with 4 sides of concrete around it. The bulb tees are shaped kind of like this with the bulb on the bottom. Sound wall up in the Chicago area, there's quite a bit of sound wall, and then also retaining wall systems. So those are the biggest transportation products that we see. Yes? He was asking what sound wall is. Sound wall is a wall system that you would see on the side of a highway. So usually it's some kind of decorative concrete piece about 8 inches thick. You see it in more densely populated urban areas where they don't want the sound of the highway going to the homes on either side or the businesses on either side. So we see a lot of that up north, not so much down here. So that's kind of the typical products that you see with precast concrete. Does anybody have any questions about any of the products that you've seen? Okay. Oh, yeah.
On several of the buildings, like where they were occupied buildings, I'm assuming that some of that is hollow core with some kind of insulation property in it. Oh, I'm sorry.
For the walls or
yes,
the floors?
For the exterior, primarily for the exterior walls.
Yeah, some of them not so they don't use in this part of the country. We don't see a whole lot of hollow core being used for the wall systems. In Wisconsin, we do see that sometimes. So it's really a matter of what's available locally. But yeah, you can put insulation right into the wall panels. It depends on what you're using it for. That starts to make it a little bit more expensive. So a lot of times you'll put up the concrete system and then put the insulation and then put the drywall over it if you're going to drywall it. But if you're not going to drywall over it, you can put the insulation right in the middle of it. Anything else? Well, I thought I would just show you some projects just so you can see what typical projects look like with precast. We do a lot of athletic facilities, the risers beams, raker beams, the exterior systems. We see a lot of this thin brick being added right to the precast wall panel, so you get a lot of decorative finishes that way. But we see a lot of those. A lot of schools are using precast these days, whether they be just the gymnasium with a steel form or a steel structure on the interior with with precast wall panels around it or decorative pieces. Centralia High School just did a really nice high school out of precast. A lot of healthcare facilities. In the healthcare market, we see more of the exterior skin on the cladding products being used. Some designers feel like there's vibration issues that they want to stay away from with the structural system, although I have seen it used successfully in structural systems used successfully in healthcare as well. Kind of look like fire hoses. You place the concrete on top of it. As the concrete cures, you pull those the hoses out of it, and you end up with those cores. The other way is you can use an extruded method. You can manufacture it in a couple of different ways. One is a wet cast method, where you have a pretty typical kind of wet mix of concrete. You put hoses in the forms that so that's a couple different areas that you can manufacture it in. Hollow core usually is going to be about 30 feet long, and we see a lot of it used for hotels, motels, single family. Concrete might be about the same consistency as toothpaste as well, and you might have augers working in there, and that's going to create the openings in it. And with that dry mix, you can almost walk on it immediately. And with that, the precast the concrete is very dry, and it actually comes out of a machine. I always liken it to a tube of toothpaste, where you're kind of pushing the concrete out.